Packing for a bikepacking adventure is full of what ifs. What if it rains or turns cold? What if we run out of food? What if we can't make it as far as we had planned? By the time the what ifs are all answered, your bare bones 25-pound bike turns into a 70-pound bike loaded with camping gear, food, water, clothing, and repair items. Over the years, David and I have been on no less than 10 bikepacking adventures ranging from 2 to 10 days. Each one of them has been unique and all have been magnificently enjoyable. After scratching twice last year on a bikepacking loop through Yellowstone, one scratch due to 3 feet of snow up high early in the season, and the second due to a bicycle mechanical issue, we set our sights on the Idaho hot springs route surrounded the Sawtooth Mountain Range this year. On Thursday, September 7th, we drove 5 hours from Orem to Ketchum, Idaho, arriving shortly before noon. We unloaded the already fully packed bikes, changed into our biking clothes, took a few pictures, and were excited to be on our way. Following a gravel bike route through the beautiful mountain valley vistas with meandering streams and through forested trail as we got further north, we enjoyed the moderate temperatures, beautiful blue sky with wispy white clouds. We paused for a break trailside on a stone bench with the engraving, "You can't shoot higher than you aim." Loved it. The early afternoon wispy clouds darkened that afternoon and light rain began to fall. At mile 27, we stopped at Galena Lodge, where we had planned on getting dinner. Late season hours at the lodge were 12:30 to 3:30 lunch only, which we had missed. So we bought a few raisin oatmeal cookies, took a break as the worst of the storm blew over, and then resumed our journey following the highway briefly, then onto a forested single-track climb, which we followed for several miles before deciding to camp in the woods as the night was approaching. We ignored the bear scat close to camp and focused instead on the evening sun playing off the mountains in the distance. The temperatures fell along with the sun. We had 30 miles and 2,800 feet of climbing behind us. Day one was a beautiful start. After a brisk night's sleep, an oatmeal breakfast, breaking camp and loading the bikes, we were off, back onto the single-track climb, which almost immediately turned steep, rocky, and rutted. With loaded bikes, some sections required hiking the bike for a bit. After a mile or so of this terrain, the single track crossed the highway, and it was an easy decision for us to finish the climb on the highway, partly because we had planned on traveling nearly 60 miles before camping. Even on the highway, climbing is slow going, but the climb finally gave way to a fast and restful descent before slowing in the beautiful valley below. Even on loaded bikes, there is some advantage to be gained by drafting another biker, so as we ground out the miles on the flat, we would take turns out front, taking a break by a brook or where we could find shade. Our goal was to make it to Stanley, Idaho for lunch, where we would then turn westerly. Stanley's quite a small town, yet it was a metropolis compared to many of the towns we would encounter later in the week. After a burger, fries, nachos, and lots to drink, we were off again. You may have noticed a moose head on the back of David's bike. I asked him, "What's with the moose head?" and this is what he had to say.
A few years ago, while bike touring through Jasper, Banff, and Glacier National Parks, I saw this plastic moose head on the side of the road and decided to stop and pick it up. It has become my riding partner on that trip and is now the mascot that keeps a lookout behind me on all my multi-day bike trips.
After some afternoon road riding, we rode into our camp at Banner Creek around 3:30 in the afternoon after a 57-mile day. The creek was beckoning us to wash the sweat off of our faces, bodies, and biking clothes. After some lounging around in the afternoon, we cooked up a freeze-dried dinner of chicken, rice, and veggies. We enjoyed the trickle of the nearby stream and eventually the light show of the evening sunset. Day 2 was in the books. We decided to delay breakfast on day 3 in favor of a late breakfast at the Sourdough Lodge, 24 miles down the paved road. By mid-morning, we were enjoying large omelet platters with toast and orange juice. It was well worth the wait. We made the mistake of leaving uneaten food on our plates as we were full. Later that day, when we stopped to resupply, we found that the convenience store was closed for the season and realized we could have bagged up our extra omelets for use later that day. We stopped for a break at a well-used hot spring, but resisted the urge because we would be camping close to a hot spring that evening. Despite being loaded, we made good time on the paved roads. Wind can become an issue on the roads, but the winds cooperated and we had a fair amount of downhill slope. So we were able to complete our 56-mile ride today, pulling into the hot spring campground by mid-afternoon. After setting up our tents and relaxing a bit, we got serious about relaxing and made our way over to the hot spring where we relaxed, cleaned our salty bodies in the hot pools. We had come 143 miles in 2.5 days, and we're at the end of day 3. We didn't know it, but day 4 was to be our toughest day of the trip. We left the pavement for good and would do 2 climbs totaling nearly 6,000 feet, the second of which had many sections exceeding a 10% grade, and some requiring hiking the bikes instead of grinding up the grade. The first climb was moderate and warmed us in the morning sun as we enjoyed the scenic views. We took breaks as needed. We enjoyed a rest break at the summit of the first climb, as well as views down into the valleys on either side. We then descended down into Idaho City, the only place to resupply for 2 days. We ordered a large pizza, ate half, and bagged the other half for dinner that night. We took some time there to recharge our batteries and our bodies and to resupply with drinks, snacks, and food. As soon as we left Idaho City, the next climb began. This steep climb tested our commitment and our preparation. On climbs like this, you question every ounce you added to your bike and why you're carrying so much food and water. You try to wipe the sweat from your face, but your gloves and sweatbands are fully saturated, and the sweat drips from your face onto your bike and frame bags. Your muscles are tired and threatening to cramp, and you wonder if you're making any progress at all. My bike is geared just a little bit lower than David's, making it easier for me to keep the pedals moving on the steep sections. I was so impressed that Dave just kept at it. He's a machine and he just keeps it going. Even when it's challenging, there is an exhilaration from the beauties that surround us, from the adventure itself, and even from the exercise and exertion. Breaks as needed, lots of electrolyte-filled drinks, and junk food fueled us as we pedaled our way to the Bald Mountain Campground, a mile or so short of the summit. Once there was plenty of time to relax, to set up our tents, and to go about the evening chores, such as the procurement of filtered water, washing the sweat from our bodies and clothing, eating dinner, leftover pizza in this case, and enjoying the sights and sounds of the evening and the shadows as the sun retreats. We had only come 43 miles, but had climbed 5,900 feet, and were quite content to enjoy the evening and possibly doze off just a bit early. Idaho City was now 25 miles behind us, and the next very small city 96 miles ahead. That's 121 miles with nothing but pine forests and wide open wilderness that would take us the next 2 days to traverse. We saw 1 or 2 hunters, 3 or 4 jeeps, and a group of 4 or 5 bikepackers for the better part of that 121 miles. We were thankful and actually a bit surprised that there wasn't more ATV or vehicular traffic, but also quite conscious of just how isolated we were, especially along this stretch of the route. The solitude and moderate temperatures were just a few of the perks of late season riding, offset just a bit by the fact that several of our planned resupply stops and cafes were closed for the season. My body engine runs a bit hot, like a diesel versus a gasoline engine, so I kept pushing for early starts so we could get a good ride in before the warmer afternoon hours were upon us. I was up early on day 5 and got to see the moon, the stars, and the golden glow of the sunrise on the horizon. It was stunning. I took a short hike up the mountain, and by the time I got back, David was up, and we both had our phones out taking pictures of the magnificent sunrise. After an oatmeal breakfast and breaking camp, we were off again. We didn't know it, but there was still plenty of steep in what was left of the climb to the summit. It's hard to appreciate the grades that we were climbing on in most videos, but these are our best attempts.
You all right?
Yeah.
You're on candid camera, by the way. Taking a break.
Yeah, it seemed like a really good spot for a break. Yeah, I was running out of room on that side.
Yeah, I saw that.
We finally reached the summit and had a short ride across the top with incredible views of the rolling, wooded valleys below that we would be descending into. We were relieved to be on the other side of the climb and hoped for roads that didn't unduly slow our descent. Overall, the roads were better than we had expected, with minimal washboards, ruts, mud holes, etc. We still had to be careful, but we were able to descend at a pretty reasonable clip, enjoying the cool morning temperatures and the stunning and varied scenery as we rode along. We were headed for Arrow Rock Reservoir east of Boise, where we would change course from southerly to easterly. I had previously been on this road from the reservoir to the very small town of Atlanta, Idaho, where our family had vacationed several years earlier. I remember seeing a bike packer traveling along this road and thinking, I'd like to bike here someday, as the road follows the beautiful North Fork of the Boise River before emptying into the reservoir. By this time it was early afternoon. There was a very small and eclectic roadside shop that we stopped at. The live-in owner was cordial and wore a Harry Potter-type leather hat that he had been given. He had neither a vehicle nor a phone, but neither was essential. We enjoyed some ice cream sandwiches, soda pop, and a few other goodies with his company before making our way upriver to a campsite across the river from a hot spring oozing right out of the rocky mountainside. Afternoon of day 5, we had traveled 41 miles for the day, 227 miles total, and had the afternoon to lounge by and wash in the river, eat a hot meal, and, because we were now in the warmer valley, seek the shade for the evening.
"8:30 a.m. and we are 10 miles from the turnoff by Atlanta. We'll lose the Boise River at that point."
David, using the resource of the Adventure Cycling Association, had done all of the route planning for this trip. We were planning for 7 or 8 days, depending on how we were doing. The last day being the lingering question, as it included 60 miles of 4,200-foot climb and the highest elevation that we would reach on the trip at 8,700 feet. As planned, there were 3 significant days of climbing: day 4, today, and 1 climb to finish the trip. We debated along the way whether to take a detour into Atlanta so I could show David its beautiful setting nestled amid the Sawtooth Mountains, but it would have added to both the mileage and to the climb to get to the other side, so in the end we chose the more direct route. After 10 miles with the river as our companion, we turned south, leaving the river, and started the climb toward Rocky Bar and the small town of Featherville, where we would eat and resupply. The 4,200-foot climb that awaited us would prove to be both challenging and rewarding. The challenge was not so much how far we had to climb as it was the overall grade of the climb. At a moderate grade, we could pedal all day, but when the grade gets above 10%, it requires a lot of effort to keep a loaded bike going. Again, I was so impressed with David's determination, stamina, grit, and even humor as the grades got menacing.
It has been 10% all the way, it seems like. The climb we did 2 days ago was as much elevation, but it was gradual, and it was this just grind.
Do not be fooled. This video is not slow motion. I'm really pedaling this slow.
And somewhere there's the pass right up there. We've got another 1,200 feet to go or so. But it's eating us alive. We're almost to the summit. Couple hundred feet. Kind of an overcast day, thank goodness. Cooler temperatures, but beautiful. And we came from the bottom, all the way down there in the bottom. I'm hoping for a fault summit.
12.5% grade, and I'm going at 2.5 miles an hour.
If that's 12.5, we've been doing 14, 15, and 16.
When we finally reached the summit, we were ready for a decent break and a few snacks. The views were expansive and beautiful, and the temperature ideal. The miles that came so slowly when we were climbing would add up quickly on our descent. Descending is always enjoyable as your body has some time to recover and your focus is on negotiating the turns, bumps, and surprises of the road. We made good progress until we reached the flatter terrain of the valley below and pedaling resumed, and we made our way into Featherville by early afternoon. We went into a cafe that had just opened. In a town as small as Featherville, open can mean different things. In this case, open meant that the doors were open, but they weren't quite ready to serve customers. We were happy to relax. When they were ready, we ordered burgers and fries for our late lunch, chicken veggie wraps to be wrapped up for tomorrow's lunch, and nachos to be partially eaten for lunch and the remainder for our dinner. Other patrons, including a single bike packer, began arriving, and we could tell that we'd be a while. When our burgers came out, I asked if he would be okay with just boxing up the nachos for our dinner. He had overheard our conversation with the other bike packer and asked where we would be spending the night. We told him that we would be at a campground with a hot spring 10 miles down the road. He then offered to cook up the nachos later that evening, fresh and hot, and deliver them to us, along with the wraps and some other drinks that we had purchased. Talk about small town hospitality. That was one of the sweet surprises of our trip. The hot spring at the campsite was also a welcome respite. Whenever we near the end of a trip like this, the comforts of home start calling us, and we push it the last day. We were confident that with an early start, we could do a 60-mile day, even with a healthy climb and the fact that it was all on gravel. David was thinking that we might reach the summit by 2 o'clock and be back to Ketchum by 4 and able to drive back home that evening. We rolled out of bed early, ate leftover nachos for breakfast, made short work of packing our bikes, and we were riding by 8 o'clock. We took joy in the morning ride, and when we got to the climb, we found it much more manageable as far as the grade. Both climbs were roughly 4,200 feet, but they were worlds apart as far as the gradient. We kept a pretty good pace with a few rest stops and a lunch break to down the chicken veggie wraps that we had gotten back in Featherville. We were at the top by 2 o'clock, just as Dave had predicted. We took a short break, a few photos, and then we were off to do the last 20 miles into town, mostly downhill. Dave will attest to the fact that when I get focused on finishing a ride, I'm like a bloodhound, hot on the scent of its prey. I get down in the tuck, make the pedals churn, and there's no looking back. Not sure what David's thinking when I get in this groove, but I'm sure it's not always happy thoughts. Again, as he predicted, we rolled into Ketchum around 4 p.m., having done a 60-mile, 4,200-foot day, and roughly 330 miles with 21,500 feet of climbing for the trip. The bikes and the bodies had held up well.
Okay, end of day 7. We're on our way home. We were going to go 8 days, but we decided to push it the last day, and we did 57 miles, 4,100 feet. A pretty big, yeah, our biggest climb actually, right?
Yeah, topped out at like 8,700 feet.
And the legs were up to it, I guess.
Just barely.
It was a long haul into Ketchum.
Yeah, once we got to the summit, it was like 23 more miles.
Mostly downhill.
Mostly downhill, but but there's just something about the last day of the trip. You just don't mind pushing it a little bit more than you might normally do, and that's what we did today.
That's been our MO, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if you told us a week or two ago that we were going to do close to 60 miles and 4,100 feet, we would have laughed. I think we did laugh. We thought there's no way, but we did, and are tired, but you know,
It was a good day.
it was a good day.
A good hard day. Two days in a row of good climbs,
Yeah.
actually.
Yep.
So
Yeah, it was nice to work out the way this trip worked out. The first, 2 or 3 days weren't too bad, climbing wise, or we didn't have big days. But yeah, these last 3 days have been.
yeah, we were going to break this up and do it in 2 days.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Great trip.
amazing trip.
Yep, for sure.
So
Another one for the books.
another one for the books.
Yep.